Coming up on this episode of The Folklorist, two brave men hold their stations atop a doomed lighthouse. A woman fights for her right to ride on a streetcar. And an unbelievable discovery attracts the attention of the greatest showman on earth. Journey with me now as we explore these fascinating tales on The Folklorist. Hello, friend. Welcome to The Folklorist. There's a place off the coast of Massachusetts where jagged rocks lie hidden beneath a churning riptide, creating a deadly trap for unsuspecting captains and their ships. This place is known as the Glades. Local Native American tribes were aware of this turbulent undercurrent, and when European explorers like Champlain, Smith, and Standish traveled through this passage, they nearly fell prey to these perilous waters. And during the early 1800s, over 40 ships went down. This history of shipwrecks led locals to demand that a lighthouse be constructed to save lives and to warn off unwary vessels of the dangers that lurk just beneath their hulls. So in 1843, an inspector from the U.S. Lighthouse Service selected an area off the Glades called Minot's Ledge as the place to build a sturdy stone lighthouse. The loss and lives of property here will continue to occur until a light is established. The service went ahead and commissioned Captain William Swift of the Corps of Topographical Engineers. Swift had recently finished a lighthouse held up by iron stilts, a cost-efficient alternative to a stone structure. So he persuaded the service to build a 75-foot-high lighthouse on iron pilings near Minot's Rock, a 25-foot-wide reef a mile off the coast.
There will be a keeper's room and lantern at the very top of the structure. It will offer less resistance to the waves. Waves certainly can't pass through stone.
Construction began in the spring of 1847, with Swift hiring project foreman James Sullivan Savage, the architect of the Bunker Hill Monument in Charlestown, Mass. Savage had 9 holes drilled 5 feet deep in a 25-foot circular diameter. Then he cemented in 45-foot iron pilings with braces to reinforce them. But construction was tedious, as it could only take place on very calm days at low tide. Continuously rotating crews of men worked strenuously in 20-minute shifts. The workers would stay overnight on board a nearby schooner to save time. But when the seas got too rough, they sought shelter in the harbor, which continuously delayed the project. In addition to this, 2 major storms struck the coastline in the summer of 1847. This began to weaken the integrity of the structure. But work never ceased. That is, until January 1st, 1850, when the lighthouse was lit for the very first time. It was a state-of-the-art lighthouse with reflector lamps, an observation room, living quarters, and storage. The lamp shone brightly as it warned off mariners taking passage through the night. It was an engineering marvel and just what the South Shore of Massachusetts needed. On April 5th, Isaac Dunham, the first keeper of the newly erected lighthouse, peered across the ocean and saw a fierce storm brewing on the horizon. Dunham, an experienced lighthouse keeper, had seen his fair share of storms. But when the wind started to howl and the waves began to crash, he knew something was terribly wrong.
God will in mercy still the raging sea. We must perish. It appears to me now that if the wind continues from the east, I cannot survive the night.
But he survived, and now Dunham was very concerned about the stability of the lighthouse. It began to slowly sway in heavy winds, and after a storm in late July, Dunham wrote to the U.S. Lighthouse Service asking for the iron pilings to be strengthened. But his request was ignored, and as a result, Dunham would resign a few months later. In late 1850, the service selected John Bennett as the new lighthouse keeper. He hired Joe Wilson and Joseph Antoine to be his assistants, who were highly confident and boisterous young men. But it didn't take long before Bennett developed the same concerns that his predecessor had. He noted that the pillars had become loosened, and whenever a large wave struck the tower, it would rock, knocking anyone and anything to the ground. He openly told visitors that he would be surprised if the lighthouse would remain standing throughout the winter. Bennett warned the service on numerous occasions about the durability of the structure, insisting that the strained piling braces be removed, straightened, and strengthened. But when officials finally visited the lighthouse to investigate Bennett's claims, it was on a perfectly calm day, which hid the effect that strong storms had. And after examining the structure, they declared that no action needed to be taken. On March 16, 1851, another major storm descended upon the coast. The keepers were forced to retreat from the top lantern level all the way down to the storage room at the bottom of the lighthouse. On April 11th, Bennett was in Boston procuring a new keeper's boat to replace the one that was lost during the storm. Little did he know that another storm, this one of epic proportions, was heading straight at them. The winds began to blow out of the northeast, and the ocean began to get rough, with giant black swells rolling against Minot's ledge. Rain, then hail, and finally snow pummeled the region along with hurricane-force winds. This, coupled with a full moon, amplified an already high tide, creating a dreadful recipe for disaster. While Bennett was stuck in a submerged Boston, Antoine and Wilson were trapped inside the teetering lighthouse. Even though Wilson had once bragged he could swim to shore if the lighthouse ever toppled, he now realized their lives were in serious danger. Over the next few days, the storm pounded the Massachusetts seaboard, and on April 16th, when Bennett had finally arrived back at the Glades, the storm began to intensify. When he peered out through the driving sleet, he saw the lighthouse still standing, but feared for his men. Meanwhile, at Minot's ledge, the howling winds rocked the lighthouse back and forth as Antoine and Wilson held on for dear life with no way out. But at 5 p.m., the men managed to climb the ladder and light the lamp, carrying out their responsibility to protect vessels foundering in the turbulent ocean. But by 10 p.m., the light went out. And 3 hours later, residents could hear the lighthouse bell ringing wildly. Bennett, along with others, gathered on the beach, but they could not see the lighthouse through the relentless snow. The residents implored Bennett, "Go and help those poor souls. Save the light keepers." "There's nothing I can do." A monstrous wave smashed the lighthouse. A thunderous groan echoed across the Glades. The light was out. The ringing had stopped. The lighthouse and the young men were swallowed by the ocean. The storm finally passed, and at the first break of dawn, Bennett hurried down to the beach and peered out across the bay. And what he saw was truly heartbreaking. All that was gone. A few weeks later, a bottle washed ashore. Inside, it contained a message from the missing men who went down with the lighthouse. The letter read, "The lighthouse won't stand over tonight. She shakes 3 feet each way now. God bless you all. J.W. and J.A." Minot's light was eventually rebuilt, this time out of stone, and was relit in 1860. The lighthouse still stands and continues to guide ships through the treacherous waters off the coast of the Glades. Today, some residents say they can still hear the sound of a phantom bell ringing as it did that tragic night in 1851, when New England's famous lighthouse storm struck. Is there some folklore in your town? Well, let us know about it. Send us an email, folklorist@newtv.org. We'd love to hear about it. Did you know that Minot's Ledge Light was dubbed the I Love You Lighthouse after it was refit with a new lens in 1894, and its flashes were set to intervals of 1, 4, and 3. That's because this sequence contains the precise amount of letters in the universal phrase, I love you. Change doesn't always occur in an instant. It can take years, even centuries, for a society to come to terms with its own moral shortcomings. Sometimes those who stand up for what they believe in aren't always remembered, but their acts of courage live on, and in this case, brought a nation one step closer to equality. It was a sweltering Sunday morning in New York City on July 16, 1854. Elizabeth Jennings was running late to church, and during that time, the city was bustling with the clamor of horse-drawn streetcars. But not everyone was allowed to ride these streetcars. You see, they had restrictions, and even though New York had abolished slavery in 1827, segregation was still deeply woven into the fabric of society. Elizabeth was an educated woman from a well-respected family. Devoutly religious and being the church organist, she could not be late to the service. So Elizabeth and her friend Sarah Adams dashed down the city streets in order to make it to church on time. They saw a streetcar in the distance and motioned for it to stop. They rushed aboard, unaware of which passengers would be accepted. But as they entered the streetcar to pay their fare, the conductor stopped them and insisted they get off and wait for the next car. She said she was late for church and couldn't wait for another car. But the conductor wouldn't listen and insisted again that she get off. Elizabeth, however, stood her ground, refusing to budge. The conductor relented and said that she could board the streetcar as long as no other passengers were offended by her presence. Elizabeth, now insulted, said, "I'm a respectable person born and raised in New York. I don't know where you were born, but you are a good-for-nothing impudent fellow for insulting decent persons while on their way to church." The conductor loudly informed her that he was a proud Irish immigrant and threatened to throw her out of the car, but Jennings insisted that he wouldn't lay a hand on her. At that moment, he grabbed her, but she quickly clutched onto a nearby curtain. He pulled at her until she lost her grip and pushed her out of the car. Nearby citizens started to notice the skirmish and gathered around to witness what was happening. But as the conductor attended to his frightened horses, Elizabeth climbed right back on. The conductor saw this. "You shall sweat for this." As they rode, he saw a police officer and flagged him down. The officer came aboard and ignored what Elizabeth had to say, throwing her to the ground and ruining her Sunday best. After the confrontation, Elizabeth got her father involved, who used his connections to make sure that this injustice would not go unnoticed. He reached out to a powerful friend of the family, Frederick Douglass, who printed the story, and the incident soon gathered national attention. Rallies were held, a new group, the Black Legal Rights Association, was formed, and soon after, the Jennings family filed a lawsuit against the railway company. Her father began to search for legal counsel that would help them in their case, and hired 24-year-old Chester Arthur to represent them. On the day of the trial, Elizabeth found herself face to face with an all-white, all-male jury. It seemed impossible that she would win, but the politically gifted Arthur delivered a convincing case, and remarkably, the verdict returned in her favor. Her victory would signify an important shift in civil rights that would occur over the next 100 years. Although the story of Elizabeth Jennings remains largely forgotten, her personal experience would affect the lives of progressive thinkers like Frederick Douglass or the 21st President of the United States, Chester Arthur. You see, it takes the actions of courageous people to effect change, no matter the cost. And 100 years later, another woman, Rosa Parks, would take a stand against segregation by refusing to surrender her seat, reigniting the fight for equality once sparked by Elizabeth Jennings. Did you know, in 1944, Irene Morgan was jailed in Virginia for refusing to sit in a segregated section of a bus. Her case went all the way to the Supreme Court, who ruled that segregation on interstate buses was illegal. Morgan stated, "If something happens to you which is wrong, the best thing to do is have it corrected in the best way you can." Disclaimer. With folklore, sometimes the biggest casualty is fact. But please, keep watching. How would you like to see something that you've never seen before? So full of wonder it'll amaze you. So sensational, it will shock you. So spectacular that you'll tell your friends and your loved ones that you were the first to see it. Step right up and see the greatest show on earth. That'll be 25 cents, please. It was a crisp autumn day on October 16, 1869 in Cardiff, New York, when a farmer named William Stub Newell instructed 2 men to dig a well near his barn. As the laborers toiled away, their shovels suddenly hit something solid. They carefully removed the dirt around the object, trying to expose what was impeding their progress. Moments later, the workmen hurried into the house, exclaiming that they had uncovered something extraordinary. Stub rushed to the spot, and in disbelief, they gazed down upon a gigantic 10-foot-tall, 3,000-pound stone man. They spent the next few days excavating the site as word quickly spread of their miraculous find. Newell was amazed at the amount of people who were coming out to his little farm just to have a peek at his Cardiff giant. The shrewd man that he was, Stub saw this as an opportunity to make some money. So he erected a tent around the stone figure and charged 25 cents for admission. Yet despite the fee, the number of visitors continued to rise, and Stub was pleasantly surprised by his good fortune. Soon the rumors of a petrified man spread across the countryside until the Syracuse Journal confirmed the astounding discovery. Buggies, stagecoaches, and wagons were now arriving at Newell's farm, so he doubled the price of admission to 50 cents. A young woman was heard to say, "Nothing in the world can ever make me believe that he was not once a living being. Why, you can even see the veins in his legs." People began to wonder where the enormous being came from. Was it a fossilized giant human, as referenced in the Bible? Could it be a statue carved in antiquity by an ancient Native American tribe? Despite the varying theories, the Cardiff giant was now a sensation. But there were skeptics who doubted the authenticity of the giant, and some even questioned the story surrounding its discovery. Cornell University co-founder Andrew Dickson White was especially critical. After visiting the site, he questioned why Newell would dig a well when there was already a stream running nearby. When he examined the statue, he found no evidence that ancient sculpting techniques were used. And on top of that, it was comprised of gypsum, a mineral not native to the area. When White interviewed neighboring farmers, they reported seeing a tall, lanky man who frequently visited the farm. He seemed to be instructing Stub, who was handing over his gate receipts. This man was identified as Stub's brother-in-law and business partner, George Hull, and one farmer recognized him. "Why, that's the man who brought the big box down the valley." One evening the previous fall, outside of a tavern along the Valley Turnpike, he noticed a wagon carting an enormous box. Hull told him that he was bringing some tobacco-cutting machinery from his farm to Syracuse. But despite White's suspicions, Newell and Hull continued to profit from their sideshow. The Cardiff giant was now a national attraction, and a banker named David Hannum struck a $30,000 deal with the 2 men for majority ownership. He moved the giant to Syracuse, where it was prominently displayed in an exhibition hall. And of course, they raised the price of admission to $1. Newell, Hull, and Hannum were now making some serious cash. And that's when P.T. Barnum, the greatest showman of his time, caught wind of the giant. He wanted a piece of the action and offered Hannum a staggering $50,000 for his prized possession. But Hannum declined, realizing there was still more money to be made. Not to be outdone, Barnum quickly cooked up his own scheme and hired a team of workers to carve a duplicate. Then he unveiled his own giant, denouncing Hannum's as a fake. With a knack for sensationalizing oddities and never passing up a chance to display his showmanship, Barnum lured scores of people to check out his replica. Needless to say, Hannum was enraged. He filed a lawsuit against Barnum for his fraudulent imitation and slanderous remarks. The case went to trial, and the validity of both giants was closely scrutinized. The 2 statues were very similar, as they were both carved recently. An analyst stated, "If the giant had been in the ground for any length of time, the lines would have been worn away." The case was at a stalemate, and then, unexpectedly, George Hull came forward and confessed that the Cardiff giant saga was an elaborate hoax of his own creation. It all started a few years earlier when Hull got into a disagreement with a Reverend who was adamant that giants had once roamed the earth. With a failing tobacco farm and a desire to mock the Reverend's claim, Hull devised an elaborate stunt that fooled countless people. He acquired a special gypsum rock with a vein-like composition. Then he hired 3 sculptors to secretly carve the stone Titan in an isolated barn outside of Chicago. They painstakingly sought to create a human likeness by meticulously carving pores and then aging the statue with sulfuric acid. From there, he shipped the giant by train to Cardiff and then hauled it to Newell's farm. He arrived in the dead of night and buried the huge statue between the barn and the house. They waited a year for the earth to settle and for anyone who had possibly seen the giant being transported to forget about it. 1 year later, Stub told the workmen where to dig so they would accidentally find it, and the rest is history. The lawsuit between Barnum and Hannum was thrown out, as both of their statues were declared fakes. Despite the case against them, everyone involved earned a great deal of money, returning 15 times their original investment, because Barnum, Hannum, and Hull all knew there's a sucker born every minute. Step right up and see the greatest show on earth. How would you like to see something amazing, something spectacular, something sensational? Come on in and see the greatest show on earth.
Hi, I'm Folklorist Andrew, and I'm going to tell you the story of Daniel Boone.
I'm Daniel Boone.
Daniel Boone was born November 2nd, 1734, and died on October 26, 1820. When he was a boy, he ran away from home and his parents, and 2 weeks later, he was coming home eating a bear.
I killed a bear.
When he was a man, he became one of the first American pioneers. Daniel Boone happened to be the man to discover the state of Kentucky.
Yep, found Kentucky.
When he was in Kentucky, he was attacked by a group of Native Americans, so he built a fort called Boonesboro to defend him from the Shawnee Indians.
Please.
He was also a general during the Revolutionary War, and one of Daniel Boone's quotes is, "All that you need for happiness is a gun, a wife, and a horse."
And I only have 2 out of 3.
Did you know that George Hull, the mastermind behind the Cardiff giant, attempted a similar hoax 7 years later by creating another colossal human figure known as the Solid Muldoon? Once again, P.T. Barnum offered $20,000 for the attraction. A lighthouse built to save lives topples into the sea. An incredible act of courage sparks a movement towards equality, and a sensational sideshow attempts to prove that giants once roamed the earth. These are the intriguing stories that have been passed on through the generations. We are the Folklorist, and this is the new history. Till next time.